Hi everyone, welcome to THD, and today we're talking about Jump to Light Speed Spoiler Analysis Part 5. So, as usual, this is my first impression videos. Haven't played with any of those cards, so it is only my first impression, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But we're gonna try to see, among the cards that have been revealed this week, which one I think have potential to see play at a competitive level, at least for Premier Constructed. My opinion is either not excited, not sure, good, or amazing. And we're starting off with You All Clear Kid. So this card is pretty specialized. It only hits space units that have 3 or less remaining HP. So its specialized nature makes it so it's more likely to be either a sideboard card or a card that is only going to play if a very specific meta shows up. Obviously, this is a set that's going to have loads of space units, which means that by definition, this card has chances to see significant amount of play, and the other bonus is that you get to give an experience token. If your opponent control no space unit, you may give an experience token to a unit. So I think that this card has a chance to see play, even if you don't get the experience, just the removal, dealing something that costs 3 or less for 2 resources, regardless of the amount of shield that he has, regardless of the amount. That's by itself is pretty good. Obviously, as soon as a 3-house unit gets like a pilot, that's most likely going to give it +1 health. It's out of range, so that's going to be a problem. So obviously, this card is a big maybe. It's going to come down to a lot of different factors whether the card like this sees play. But obviously, it is definitely powerful, and if you get the experience token, then the power swing for such a low cost is very significant. So I think it's a maybe. It's really gonna come down to the meta, to how likely it's gonna see play is really very, very difficult to say at this point. Next we got Big's Darklighter. So this is kind of a new 1-cost pilot, which is obviously quite good in the wedge archetypes based on piloting, because you get to play this for 0, and I think 0-cost upgrades are going to be the core element that's going to make wedge playable as a leader. And among those one cost pilots, I think Biggs is one of the best one we've seen. Get a +2/+1 for 1. Decent as a unit as well. 3/4/3 is not terrible. The bonus for giving overwhelm to fighters, +1 health to transport, and greater speeders, that is quite situational, I would say. I don't think that's going to be a significant bonus, but it's nice to have. And it's also a rebel, which is nice. So I think it's nice, and if you're going to be playing wedge and red, you're definitely playing that card. It's not going to be the element that's going to make the archetype stronger. It's not an element that's going to be key to the archetypes in terms of like, oh, you're not playing red just to play bigs, but if you're playing red, you're definitely playing him. So it's obviously a maybe, because whether wedge red is going to be a thing remains to be seen. But at the beginning, I was really kind of like thinking that yellow was going to be the color, the complementary color to go alongside wedge. As things move by, I think that we're starting to see more and more supports for red, so I'm starting to think that red might be the one. On top of course, red-white is just a very strong color as for an aggressive archetype, generally speaking. You get yourself access to 4 cars, I believe in, and that kind of thing. And that does kind of points you to other directions of red being the color complementary color for wedge. We'll see how it goes. Maybe both will supply. And talking about yellow, we got ourselves new legendaries, and that's the Han Solo unit legendary. This card is amazing on multiple aspects. So first of all, is one of the few pilots in the game that is strong both as a unit and as a pilot. He's strong on both hands. And he's very strong. So 4/5 for 5 ambush, that's pretty much just Bosk territory. Obviously doesn't have the ability of Bosk, but I would say that the ability of Bosk has always been kind of secondary anyways. And then if you're on the piloting side, it is kind of the super like snapshot reflex, because you play it, you get to attack with a unit right away. But instead of getting a +1/+1, you get a +2/+3. I was to say that snapshot reflex, this is much stronger than snapshot reflex, because snapshot reflex is +1/+1 for 1. This is +2/+3 for 2. And obviously, as far as like buff is concerned, uh, it's a very good deal to pay more to get more buffs, especially when those buffs are permanent, which is the case here. Not only that, you also get, if you get to be attached on a Falcon, you get to have a shoot first sort of effect, which can be quite handy. So if let's say you're playing the new Falcon, the Falcon 3, and you play Han Solo on Falcon 3, then Falcon 3 get +1 attack bonus because there's a pilot attached to it now. So that's a +3 attack bonus in total, meaning that it can actually shoot first at 6, so it can actually kill a Ruthless Raider or a Fetfire Spray in one hit without taking damage back. 6 damage is sort of a big breakpoint for space units because the two most powerful spaceship in the game almost basically are on 6 HP. So that's a really good breakpoint. Very, very situational, obviously, very anecdotal, but just once again, even just being able to attack with a unit right away is very big, because I think pilots are such a big risk. You're playing a pilot on upgrades on a unit, and that unit can get answered, and in which case you would lose the unit and the upgrade. So that's a really big gamble whenever you're playing an upgrade on something in Star Wars Limited. So whenever you can get immediate value from that upgrade, like it is the case here, that's a huge, huge bonus for the card. And once again, if it's not dealt with, then you have an enormous space unit that is on the board. So for all those reasons, I think Han Solo is amazing. The pilot cost is not even that expensive. It's a huge boost to cunning heroism. With that being said, I don't think it's an auto-include, because obviously you need to be playing a significant amount of space units. If you're just simply using this as a 4/5 ambush for 5, that sometimes can pilots, that's not good enough in my opinion. I don't think you can just jam this deck in Han 1 yellow the way it's being played right now, because I don't think it has enough space units. However, if you manage to change the list in such a way that you get a 50-50% space unit ground units, then this is where Han Solo, I think, will be a very, very strong addition to the archetypes. Any yellow cunning archetypes that basically plays cunning, whether you're playing aggro or whether you're playing control, as long as you're playing a significant amount of space unit and you're playing yellow heroism, you're going to be wanting to have that guy. So this is an amazing card. As I said, it's not an auto-include, but I think there's good reason that you're actually going to change the deck building of your deck in order to be able to include him. That's just how impactful this card is. Then we got Luke Skywalker, the new Luke Skywalker. Finally, nice to see more Luke into Star Wars. For me, Luke has always been the hero of Star Wars, and I wish we could see more of him. To be fair, I feel like we had his leader and his unit in set 1, and then beyond that, really not much. So nice to see him on the spotlight again as a leader. Unfortunately, I'm not super excited about this leader, and I'll explain you why. There's two things that bothers me with this Luke. The first one is that he doesn't really have a clear game plan. And this is something, there's always a weakness in a leader whenever you don't really know if the leader, it's a red flag whenever you see a leader and you don't really know if he's a control leader, an aggro leader, or something else. It's not really clear what Luke wants you to do. Obviously, aggro heroism wants this to be kind of an aggressive leader. Obviously, playing fighters is also very aggressive. The fighters are usually aggressive cards. And then the ability is control because it's here to deal damage to units. And then, once again, it's all aggressive, but you have a deploy on 6. Any leader that wants you to be aggressive but it actually deploys on 6 is also a big turn-off. The stats are not amazing. 5/6 for 6 is pretty bad, so obviously you want to play this as a pilot. And as a pilot, one of the cool things about Luke Skywalker is like it doesn't get blown out by a confiscate, which is neat, but it still gets blown out by stuff like Rebel's Fall. And since he has no immediate impact on the game and deploys on 6, that's a pretty big weakness to have. So, and then the ability to deal damage to unit once again if you get to attach to a fighter, that's neat. I don't think he's bad by any mean. He's also Force, which is relevant, of course. He's the same colors and 4th throw, so it's not a bad leader. There's a lot to like with him, and I think he's going to see a lot of plays in Limited. But I think that in Constructed, the competition in the red heroism realm is just insane. Basically, between the Han 2, I forgot the name. Sabine, of course, and basically all the strong, super strong red white heroism leaders. I don't see a space where Luke would see play personally. I could be wrong about this, but for now I'm not super excited about him. Then we got Data Vault. So Data Vault is one of those bases that allows you to get more than 30 HP. So it's not 35 HP, but it's also not as big as a downside. Obviously, having a starting round of 5 cards, it's a little bit hard to estimate how impactful it's going to be, but it is a pretty big deal. While here, you get to your minimum deck size gets to be increased by 10. This sounds like a big downside, because 10 cards is effectively just 10% less consistent on your entire deck. But you gotta understand something, is that it is something that in Star Wars Unlimited, having 100% of cards that are exactly the cards you want is not always the most relevant, because in Star Wars Unlimited you have the flexibility to resource the card that you don't need. And that flexibility means that you don't need to be as tight in terms of deck building as you are in other games like Magic. Don't get me wrong, I still believe that building a 50 card deck is always the most optimal thing to do. However, I think it is a lot more forgiving in Star Wars Unlimited to be playing a deck that doesn't have 50 cards, that is playing 53, 54. Even though it is suboptimal, the impact is limited because, as I said, if you draw cards you don't like, you can always resource them. That's the reason why we see, for example, Josh Yosera, also known as Yosera, wrecking tournament left and right with this 53, 54 card deck without any issues. So it is something that is worth noticing, is that even though, yes, it is wrong to play more than 50 cards, the negative impact of playing more than 50 cards is definitely over exaggerated. It's definitely overblown. So here you are getting a deck size that is increased by 10. That is significant, but you also get 3 more HP on your base, which is very significant. So in my opinion, this base is amazing, and I think it's going to see, for the same reason the 30 HP, 5 HP base is going to be amazing, this 33 HP base is amazing as well. And once again, this downside of having to have 10 more cards in your deck is only going to get smaller and smaller as time goes on. It's only going to get less and less of a downside as time goes on, because as we're going to get more cards in the game, it is going to be less of an inconvenience, because it's going to be easier to build a deck of 60 good cards whenever the card pool is very big. So in my opinion, Data Vault is amazing. I don't know if it's going to be amazing right away. Similarly to the 35 HP base that I talked about earlier, I don't know if it's going to be amazing right away, but for sure it's going to be amazing at some point. I'm sure it's going to see plenty of play. It's going to be better in Eternal, probably, because Eternal, the card pool is so big that so I think unless you're really playing a deck that really needs certain type of, to be able to draw certain type of cards to win, like for example, I don't think you can play this in Han Green, for example, because Han Green really needs to draw those resupply, really need to draw those U-wing reinforcements. But however, in a deck that doesn't care so much about this extreme consistency and want to have access to a lot of different options, then having those 3 extra HP is huge, and the downside of having a 60 card deck is not as big of a deal. So to me, this card is amazing. Next we got Red 5. Red 5 is a very solid card. Basically, I said that the new Falcon, the Falcon 3, was just good because it's a 3/4 for 3 in space that is a rebel. Red 5 is better than this because it's a 3/4 for 3 in space with a rebel with a pretty strong ability on attack ability. Obviously, the Falcon 3 has those advantages. We can get more pilot, get +1/+1. So if you're playing a pilot deck, probably you want to play the Falcon 3 instead. But otherwise, if you're not playing many pilots, then you're better off just going Red 5 because the upside is just more guaranteed. So I like this card. I think it's a good card. Then we got Trench Gambit. Trench Run, sorry. which is a very kind of like random card. I don't like card like this, personally. I don't like after hand luck, which means like luck that intervenes after the decision making process. I don't like card like this, and Trench Run is one of those. But my preference aside, how good is this card? Well, +4 attack for 1 resources is insane. It's insane. However, and I said this before and I say it again, buffs that are situationals are almost always bad. And the reason being is very simple. Buff spells by definitions are pretty situational because you need to have a ready unit in play to be able to use them. And they kind of usually are kind of finishers, so you only want to play them in the late of the game when they actually give you the killing blow. So adding an additional condition to an already situational card is a pretty big turnoff. And that's the reason why the buff spells you see play in Star Wars Limited, whether it's Heroic Sacrifice, whether it's Surprise Strike, whether it's Cunning, all those buff spells are almost always unconditional. They basically work on any kind of cards. Obviously, you can play around this by simply playing so many fighters in your deck that the card doesn't become conditional anymore. And this is where Trench Run comes in. I think if you're playing a deck that has 70-80% of fighters, then suddenly the card becomes very powerful, just like Rebel Assault works because you're playing 90% of rebels in your deck. So that's the first thing. So that's the first condition. The other condition, of course, is to discard 2 cards of defending players. And on this, I think you're gonna have to run some very advanced maths to know how much damage that's gonna deal. In my opinion, not that many, because obviously, even in control decks, the majority of cards in the deck cost between 2 and 3, and the card that will cost 8, 7 are usually pretty rare. So I think the odds of this dealing a significant amount of damage to your unit is, I think if you're doing this on a unit that has more than 3 health, you're pretty safe. I haven't done any advanced math to figure this out, so obviously I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people who are going to try to break down the math and see what are the odds of damage being dealt against any given decks. And that's probably what you're going to have to figure out whenever you're going to be running that card, because that's going to be changing your decision making on when and how, on what kind of target you actually want to play this. But that's an additional condition. But needless to say, +4 attack for 1 is huge. So in my opinion, I think this card is good. I could be completely wrong about this. I think I was really hesitating between whether I was not sure whether I decided to commit and give it a thumbs up, because I think there's enough fighters in the set to make this worth it, and I think against the majority of decks, the damage is not really that big. That you can play this relatively safe, especially with now the abilities to give units additional health with pilots. I think this card is going to be relatively safe against the majority of decks, and in which deck it's not safe, you can simply resource the card. Just for confirmation, for people who didn't know, obviously if the damage are enough to kill your units, you don't get to deal any damage to the base. That's a big deal. Next we got Massassi Tactical Officer. This card is actually pretty good on paper because it's actually action efficient. This allows you to effectively attack with 2 units into 1 because you play the action, you attack with the fighters, you give a +2 attack bonus. So this effectively, just like you attacked with this guy plus another fighter in 1 action, so it's very action efficient. It also, so in terms of stats, it kind of is a 2/4 for 1, which is pretty insane. And it's a rebel as well, which is neat, so that means you can buff it with a bunch of stuff, like Dodonna, Rebel Assault, that kind of thing. So lots of good thing going on with this card. However, of course, the big problem with the card is the fact that it's if your opponent get rid of whatever fighter, then this card is rendered useless. It needs to operate with another fighter to actually work. So this is the reason why I don't like it. Maybe there's a way this card can be good, but like I think that just the fact that you just have to get rid of the other fighter to prevent this thing from attacking, and if you just miss even like 1 attack or 1 activation of this card because that happened, then that's pretty bad. Then it's already making the card a little bit worthless in my opinion. So I think it's going to be too easy for the opponent to kind of like counteract it for this to be good. And even if you do manage to make it work without it being counteracted, it's not that insane. So the floor for this card is very low because it's basically useless if there's not another fighters. And the ceiling on how powerful it is when it actually works is actually not that high. Then we got Radiant 7. When I read the card, I was not super excited at first, and then I remembered that Triple Dark Raid exists. So, Triple Dark Raid loves when play effect, because obviously the downside of Triple Dark Raid is like the unit doesn't stay in play. But if the value of the card comes from the when play ability, then suddenly the fact that the card doesn't stay in play is not really not that big of a downside anymore. And it's exactly what's happening with Radiant 7. You're going to be able to play Triple Dark Raid, so you go Triple Dark Raid on 5. Triple Dark Raid on 5. You get a 5/6, you get 5 indirect damage, and then you get to swing for 5/6, which is pretty strong. And for that turn at least, all units that got damage get -1 attack. And then you can play it later on, and then once again, do the word play again. So, also a capital ship, which we have some synergies around us in this set. You can play it for cheaper, playing obviously with Piet. You can also play the red removal, the red thing that deals a bunch of indirect damage, that kind of thing. So all this, like, this card is really insane in combination with I forgot the name of the card, but it basically deals 12 indirect damage if you have a capital ship in play, and that's just absurd with this card. Too bad the ability doesn't work on leaders, but I feel like the card by itself is not great, but just the fact that it does so well with Triple Dark Raid is huge, and I think that it fits a specific need. Because Triple Dark Raid had a big weakness, is that it's an amazing card, but unfortunately in yellow, we didn't really have any great card to combine it with, so you always had to choose which card you wanted to combine it with. You either play red, and you could play Ruthless Raider, or you have to play green. You could play cards like Reinforcement Walker, but we didn't have any great target for it in yellow, and now we do. So that's a pretty big deal. The fact it's in really the biggest deal with this card is the fact that it's obviously available to both heroism and villainy. Especially, this is mostly going to be playing in villainy. I can guarantee you this right away, and I can say that the fact that it's in the same color as Triple Dark Raid is huge for the card. If it would have been any other color than yellow, I would have put it in the trash right away. I would have said this is garbage. But this is not the case, so it's a good card. Next, we got Tantive IV, such an iconic ship of the Star Wars franchise. Is this any good? Well, big spaceship Sentinel so far has not really been super trendy, and that's because the game is mostly based on space, which means that space Sentinels are by definition quite situational, and whenever people want to swarm the board in spaces, they usually like to do it early on, which means that you much rather have something like a Concord Dawn Interceptor or a Bright Hope if we want to lock the space arena. Tantive IV comes in at 7, which is way too late to block those things. However, the meta is going to change. We're going to see a lot more space units than we used to, and we're also going to see a much more bigger space units than we used to. The fact that this thing 7 health is a pretty big deal. Means it basically doesn't die to Restless Raider, doesn't die to Fire Spray, so that's pretty nice. Obviously, considering it costs 7, I think that's the least you can expect. And if it gets killed right away, at least you got an X-Wing out of it, which is not bad. So it does have immediate impact on the game. It is a rebel, it is a capital ship. So I think there's a lot of things to like about this. I don't think it's amazing, and I think whether it's going to see play is really going to be situational. I think, for example, that the Raddus is much better as a space Sentinels if you're playing a leader that is resistance, but not every... obviously, resistance leaders now, we still don't know if there's going to be any that is any good. So obviously that's going to... so if you want a big space units, if you're not playing a resistance leader and you want a big space Sentinels, Tantive IV is currently your best option. So I'm going to give this a maybe. That's going to be depending on the meta whether it's going to see play or not. Then we got a new leader. So I'm really conflicted about this leader. There's things that I like. Being able to put units on the board for free is very good. There's no other leader that can do that, so that's pretty unique and pretty powerful. The stats, it can deploy on 6, but the stats as a pilot are pretty insane, and it also has immediate impact, which means that even if the opponent get dealt, if the opponent deals with it, you still got some value out of it. That's the good thing. It's also force. It's also a Vader, so you can combine it with other like Vader related stuff. Um, Here's the reason why I'm not a big fan of this Vader. The reason why I'm not a big fan of this Vader is because you need to have attacked with a non-token vehicle. So obviously, that's very easy to counter for the opponent because you play a vehicle unit. Your opponent is going to have an entire time to prevent you from attacking with it. And even if you manage to trigger the couple of ability twice, as long as your opponent is keeping clean of your non-token vehicles, he's kind of fine for things to get out of control. The TIE Fighters are not Imperial, which is huge because it means there's a lot of interaction, things that don't work with them, and obviously, right now there's not really that many ways to get advantage of those TIE Fighters, and I would say that kind of going wide strategy have not really been very successful in Star Wars Limited for very good reasons. Because it's very slow. It's very slow. It's very easy to counter. There's tons of cards that counter the type of strategy. So even if this Swarm TIE Fighter kind of strategy ever works out, it's going to be so ridiculously easy to counter that I don't think it's ever going to see play. It's not great against aggro because it's too action intensive. Your opponent can just... Being action intensive on a mirror of aggro is just insanely important. And against control, it's too easy to counter because the opponent can just like... There's just too many cards that counters it in every color possible. I could make a list of 25 cards that counters that counters those kind of strategies. So I'm not super optimistic whether this is going to see play or not. Right now, I'm giving this a maybe. I'm giving this a benefit of the doubt because there's some stuff to like about it. Maybe if you want to play a green-black space strategy, maybe a green-based space aggro deck, this is probably your best option. Even though this is debatable, there's also Tarkin, which, if you remember, is a deck that already sees plays, that is a green villainy space aggro strategy. So will this be better than Tarkin? I strongly doubt it. I'll give it a generous maybe, but honestly I'm not optimistic. Now a much nicer card in my opinion. So 4/3, good stats, very good ability, gives other ability, space units +1/+1. Regardless of their Imperial, whatever, it doesn't matter, so it works on the tokens. It's also an Imperial himself. So this card is a straight up auto-include, in my opinion, in the current Tarkin space deck, which is already kind of competitive, even though it is not as good in set 3 that it was in set 2. So that's for that reason alone, I just want to give this a thumbs up, and obviously it will see play, of course, in that Vader go wide space strategy. Whether or not this is going to be competitive or not remains to be seen. So I think it's a solid card, and I think it's gonna see a little bit of play. Next we got I Have You Now. It was actually funny to see Wu trying to defend this card and trying to explain how this card could see play. I think it's, as he says, I think it's only gonna see play in draft, and I think this is actually one of the worst cards in the set. It's basically, for the context of Premier Constructed, there's no reason to play this card over a Shoot First, and Shoot First already doesn't see play. Shoot First has already became a little bit too situational to see play in the current meta, even though there's still a few people who play it left and right. This card is so much worse than Shoot First. It's not even close. You don't get a +1 attack bonus. It only works on vehicles. It does, yeah, that's just so much, that is so much worse in so many levels. The case in which this would be better than Shoot First is like a 0.00001% why that would ever be better than Shoot First. 99.999% of the case, Shoot First is better. So, for all intents and purposes, I think Shoot First is just strictly better than this card. No reason to ever play this. It's absolute trash. Moving on. Iden Versio. Not super convinced by the card. 4/3 Shield for 4 is not a great stat line. And then the piloting is expensive. Doesn't have an immediate impact because you don't get to attack right away. You don't get some sort of value. If your opponent just has a removal, you are completely blown away. The shield token is a little bit redundant with a +3 HP. If you're giving something already +3 HP, it's already going to be very hard to kill from any sorts of damage-based removal or from attacking. So giving a shield on top of that is a little bit redundant. The only thing I like about Iden is the fact that she's probably the best thing you can play. So you play turn 1 space units. That's probably, if you're against a certain type of decks, playing this on turn 2 into that 2-drop in space is probably one of the best things you can do, because then you end up with a super large unit. So this can be very punishing against decks that don't have ways to do this. And right now we have a lot of cards that have those kind of turn 2 play that are super punishing against people who don't have specific answers for them. Like, for example, Chewbacca, and like Wing Leader is another example for this. But we didn't have any for villainy. So having these options in villainy, I think, is interesting by itself. And for that reason alone, I give this a maybe. For that, just because it is the only card in villainy that does that. Which means having a strong turn 2 play that can super punish someone who doesn't deal with a turn 1 play. Obviously assuming that person does not play any sort of card that can help counter this thing. So I think it's playable. Maybe it's going to be a sideboard card. The fact it's in blue, it can be a problem, because I don't think blue is the aggro color usually for villainy, to say the least. Maybe this is quite good in I forgot the name. In Gal Saxon, like Gal Saxon, because then you get a 5/3 for 4 shielded, and then you get a +4/+3, which is, I don't know, maybe that's good in Gal Saxon. Next we got Corvis. So Corvis 4/5 for 5 restore 2. Remember, with Kanan Jarrus we have a 4/5 for 4 restore 1.5. So it is really much worse than Kanan Jarrus. Granted, this is in space. So obviously in space, you are usually a little bit more generous on the stat, but I'm still not super excited. The wind playability is very situational, because you need to have a pilot unit in play. That is very, very situational. What saves this card is the fact that it's a capital ship, and everything that is written capital ship on it, you have to think about this card in the context of a Piet deck. And I think in Piet, this card is actually pretty good. I think if you're playing Piet Blue, you're probably playing this, because then suddenly you're getting a 4/5 restore 2 for 4 in space. And that's quite decent in my opinion. So I'm going to give this a maybe, because there's no guarantee that Piet Blue is going to see competitive play. But if it does, I think it's probably going to play this card. No immediate impact on the game, obviously, but the 4/5 restore 2 for 4 is something that we've seen before being quite decent, notably with Kanan, and it is in space once again. So I think all those reasons makes this card definitely in the realm of playability, in my opinion. Quickly talk about the combination between Iden and Corvis. This is very much a thematic thing. I don't think you're ever going to do that. It's very unlikely. And I don't think those cards combines particularly well together in general. So it's up to you. Playing Corvis doesn't mean you need to play Iden by any stretch. You probably shouldn't, by the way. I think, as I said, I think Corvis is pretty much only going to see B play in Piet. At least that's what I see as far as we've seen, of course. Next, we got Wingman Victor 2. And 3/2 for 2 on the ground, not terrible. So this is a turn 1 play. And then the piloting, +1/+1, and create a TIE Fighter. That is pretty good. Immediate impact on the game, means it even gets removed. You got some value out of it. +1/+1 for 1 is not terrible. Obviously, you need to play the right deck for it. You need to play the right deck for it. You need to play a deck that has enough vehicles and that takes advantage of the fighters. So if the Swarm Vader deck will absolutely play this card, and I would say maybe the Tonkin deck will also want to play this card as well. So I'm going to give this a thumbs up. Moving on, we got Interceptor Ace. 2/3 for 3 grit is abysmal. I don't think we're ever going to be wanting to play this card as a ground unit, and constructed at the very least. And as far as the pilot is concerned, it is once again super overpriced. 3+2+3. So it is kind of the same. If you really want to play a 3 resources pilot, you're much better off playing Iden Versio, which gives you better stat, and a shield, which is so much better than Grit. So it is just a way worse version of Iden Versio. No reason to ever play this card, in my opinion. And then finally, we got Wingman Victor 3. 4343 is not great. The piloting though is kind of nice. Get +1/+1 and an experience if you have another unit. I'm not a big fan of this because obviously if you need to have 2 units in play to be able to get the full value out of it, and the unit side is really not as good as for the Wingman Victor 2. So on this one I'm really not optimistic. I give this a maybe. I think this is very generous. Maybe I should have rated this. I just think it's bad, honestly. As I said, like giving double +1/+1 to 2 different units is kind of nice, but once again you need to have 2 units in play for this to work, and the unit itself is pretty bad. So yeah, I'm not super big fan of this guy. I don't see he's unplayable, but I don't think it's gonna see play. I think it's only gonna see play in the Vader Swarm deck. I think because this is the only place where you're gonna be able to have significant, where your chances of being able to get the double upgrade plus experience is where the odds are the highest, basically. Anyway, thank you so much for following the video. A little wrap up here of what we've seen. So we've seen this Vader kind of space archetypes. I'm not very optimistic that this archetype is going to see play in competitive Premiere. However, there's a lot of great thing to take for the Tarkin deck. So maybe a Tarkin green-yellow deck based on triple Darklighter is going to see play. Is going to be competitive, and is going to like to see a lot of those new green cards. So that's kind of nice. As for the Luke Skywalker, I'm not super optimistic it's going to see competitive play, but there's also a lot of great card for the Rebels that we've seen today. The 33 HP base is going to be amazing. Whether it's sooner or later, it's going to be amazing, guys. You can be sure of that. So super excited to see this in action. And obviously there's this new Han Solo, which I think is going to change the way people are building heroism cunning decks, and probably also one of the most expensive card in the game in terms of like financially speaking. So definitely going to be a great pull if you're opening boosters. Thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. Bye bye.